Yep. And we are live with our 81st episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi. I didn't screw it up.
Hey guys, welcome once again to Absolute AppSec. Ken and I are excited to be here to have Matias joining us today and to talk secure code review or secure code training and training in general, gamification, all the things. We've only got a couple of announcements up front. I'm going to be at AppSec California this week, so if you're out there, please come up and say hi. I'm just there for the conference itself, but we'll be running, we'll see Leaf. There's a whole bunch of guys that have been on the show that'll be at AppSec California. They're big supporters. And I will have t-shirts with me and stickers, so please come up and say hi, because I don't want to take them home. I'd rather bring them and give them away. So, other than that, I will be at B-Side San Francisco in about a month. Ken, I'm not sure what you've got on your docket. If you've got any travel scheduled?
Nope. Just the way I like it. I was going to mention that next week, Kelly Robinson, she'll be joining us. So I'm really excited we're definitely excited for that discussion and for having her as a guest. And that's about it. And then for when people come up to you at AppSec Cali, you've got you're going to have some stuff with you, some swag, I assume.
Yeah. Yep.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. I'll have stickers and t-shirts, and I think I still have some buttons and stuff too. So, come up and say hi. So let's see. Did you have anything that you wanted to cover from a, general news perspective, Ken?
No, nothing super interesting or revelatory. What about you?
The one thing that popped up that multiple people have pinged me with over the last couple of days has been that Microsoft Application Inspector. And we'll post the link up. Seems like a pretty interesting static analysis tool that's doing not necessarily security specific application inspection, but it's non-judgmental application inspection, right? So it's basically, hey, this is what your application is doing. It looks like it's calling a URL. It looks like it has these features that it's imported. It does X, Y, and Z. This is where it's hosted, that kind of stuff. It could be a fairly interesting tool from just a capability perspective on what your applications are doing, and almost like an inventory of the application itself and the features that it provides, that kind of thing.
Well, you can't have false positive findings if you don't have findings.
Yeah.
Non-judgmental. Which, by the way, Matias, who's joining us, has plenty of background with that. I mean, he worked at Fortify and did a lot with building a static analysis tool. So I'm curious what you think of that.
Yeah.
Although you probably just heard about it, so it's kind of fun.
The meat of the conversation, right? No, so it's always good to have non-judgmental comments on your application, and in fact, we are working on something very similar too. So it's good to hear. So is it in the source code itself, or is it in the Visual Studio IDE?
No, it's source code itself. Here, Ken, did you post up that link?
I did. Yeah, I posted it.
Yeah. It actually it supports multiple languages. It's not just .NET and Node or whatever is supported in Visual Studio, but the PHP and Python. It really looks like it's doing kind of more at higher level, not necessarily like the AST, the abstract syntax tree analysis. It's doing other things outside of that.
Interesting. So it breaks down in network communications, file operations, threading. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So from I can see how it's applied in it obviously from a security perspective. This is useful, just knowing what the application is doing. And when we start talking secure code review, Ken, this is one that may be pretty interesting from just a pure application, info gathering perspective, to get an idea of what the application does, throw it at something like this rather than digging into too much source, right?
Right.
Sorry, I lost you guys for a second. Not sure what happened.
No worries. Yeah, but I mean, the languages, it doesn't show on that one. On the GitHub page, though, it does talk through the different supported languages. So there's a lot more that's there.
Okay. Nice. Yeah.
JavaScript.
I mean, until...
like even things like R, right? Like are in that list, which is interesting in a lot of like XML and other like build XMLs and things like that. So it'll be interesting to run it against code bases to see what actually kicks out. I know Eric Heitzman, who we had on the show, was texting me about it, and he said that he did say there were some like they weren't necessarily false positives, but it's not like completely dialed in yet, given that it's kind of a beta-ish tool, right? But you can see the usefulness. So.
Yeah,
I think it's funny that I work for Microsoft and you know more about what Microsoft is doing at this point than I do, because up until 10 minutes ago, I had no idea about this.
I'm more tied into it. Yeah, no, I doubt that.
I'm sorry. Did I interrupt someone? I think I might have.
Matias, what were you going to say?
No, no. I definitely have a look at that particular tool. It looks interesting. It definitely looks interesting.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring that up. Outside of that, like I haven't been following a lot on Twitter lately, so.
Me either. Well, I do want to mention that since we're on the note of Microsoft-y things, we've got this GitHub Lab CodeQL bit here, which is pretty interesting. Like, so I'm just going to put that out in case nobody's seen it before, because we have SEML. The SEML team now is with GitHub.
Yeah.
And let me put it here. And so we've got this lab where you can play around with basically doing code level queries. So anyways, I put the link there. So there's a little bit more going on our end with static analysis as well too. But yeah, it's interesting stuff. A lot of evolution. I think it's interesting too because Matias had asked about whether or not it was integrated into the IDE, and I think that's a fascinating way to always do it. Like I think it's a really cool idea is that, whenever you can flag things as people are developing, that's always like, yeah, pretty close to the source. Is it perfect? No. And honestly, if it's too noisy, it causes developer fatigue. So like, I think we all know there's some problems with that, but it's an interesting, like, as close to the tackling in the development processes as possible.
Yeah. So one thing we played around with, similar to that Microsoft one, is, for example, if you take mobile applications, what we have done is if you use, for example, the OK HTTP library, it tells you, hey, what you're doing here is you're using an unsecured connection. Doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just gives you that information. It just tells you, what, you're using an unsecured connection, and that may be good. But if it's not good, and you really have to have a secure connection, this is the way you can move that to a secure connection. So we were taking it a little bit closer to the developer. It's not a report; it's in the IDE, but it gives like some feedback to the developer, like, hey, did you know that? And then we give an explanation about what he's really doing. It's totally up to him to say, oh, that's interesting. I did not know that. So it's very similar.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Right. Seth. Well, let me introduce, by the way, I haven't done introductions. So let me first do that. So you are the co-founder and CTO of Secure Code Warrior. And for those that aren't familiar with Secure Code Warrior, we actually use it at GitHub. And the reason, I can just tell you the reason I chose it was because basically it was gamifying training and it was more interesting. And we were just talking about this before the podcast that, training used to be really boring. And now you're starting to see a far more interesting way of tackling training, which is something we're going to get into because I definitely want to talk about this. But yeah, Secure Code Warrior, there's a few things I liked about it. One of them is you can run tournaments. That was the important thing. for us to make it interesting, like to have a CTF style tournament. And then also you can just assign people training. You can, if there are findings that match up, with something you can point to on the Secure Code Warrior site, meaning like if you discovered, we'll say, command injection or something like that, you can point directly to the training. So that's why and by the way, this podcast, everybody knows there's no sponsorship. This is not professional. This is just me putting out why when I was looking at different vendors, went with Secure Code Warrior. So anyways, I'm a fan of the project, and also like big shout out to, while we're on the podcast, to Sean Varga, who I initially linked up with over there. Really, really helpful, really good person. So anyways, you've been on Application Security Weekly before, which I'll post a link to. So we don't want to duplicate too many of those questions. I guess I'll reiterate a couple of the interesting bits about you. One of them being that you sort of taught yourself programming, which was really interesting. You did security research at Ghent University, which is really cool. That's sort of what brought you into it. You worked at Fortify, where you built static analysis tools, or worked on the static analysis tooling. Yeah, actually, let me let you clarify what all it entailed at Fortify for you.
Sure. So I spent 7 years at Fortify and HP combined, because in the middle of my journey, 3.5 years in, Fortify got acquired by HP. I actually started off as an intern because I was doing static analysis at Ghent University for code obfuscation. So I moved to San Mateo and joined them as an internship, which was going to be just 3 months. But if it's California, so I really liked it over there, so I stayed on. It was a great team. It was actually a fantastic team, all top-notch people that are now having really interesting jobs in other organizations. And I found static analysis very interesting, but they also had runtime solutions. So I was working on writing these rules for the static analysis engine. I think I've done some PHP rules back in the day, Java rules. But I also had a very keen interest in all the runtime solutions that Fortify was building. Because, with Gartner, they had to have the entire suite, not only static analysis, but also dynamic analysis and the runtime application, self-protection engine. So they're working on a lot of different tools. Of course, their flagship product was the static analysis solution. So worked for 3.5 years within Fortify as a researcher, then got acquired by HP. A lot of people left. I stayed on for 3.5 years. That gave me a lot of opportunity where I was able to experiment with building solutions and actually putting them to market. So the last 3.5 years were mainly about, hey, can we build something that is meaningful for a particular customer, an add-on, a new product, can we build something and sell that to a particular customer? And at the very end, we built some very interesting, cool technology. And at that point, I was thinking like, well, maybe I can do this myself. Maybe I can make something that really helps people and that we can sell to a lot of organizations.
Nice. Yeah. So pivoting into that, and like, into more of the Secure Code Warrior sort of like how did it come about, the way that you've all designed the training to be, and again, just to reiterate, it's sort of like for those that have never seen it, you if I was on a different computer, I could log in and show you. But the long and short of it, I guess, would be that you've got code in front of you. I know there's more to it than this, but one of the main ways is that there's like code in front of you. You point to, so you kind of like, here's an introduction to that category of vulnerability. Point to where this code is vulnerable, and then choose out of the multiple solutions, which solution is correct. And you do that for so many different languages. And some of these languages have like 600 and something challenges. I thought that was really in depth and difficult, because Seth and I have built before a training platform, and we know how difficult that is. But yeah, so how did that idea come about? How did the way it's currently implemented come about, and why?
Sure. I'll, if you don't mind, I'll also take one step back and give you a little bit about the history of how it all came together.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm here in Belgium. Peter, my co-founder, is in Sydney, Australia. Peter started Secure Code Warrior with a really good group of people out of Sydney, Australia. What I did, I actually started a separate company called Sensei Security out of Bruges, Belgium. Our vision, our idea was exactly the same. It was, how can we help developers write secure code? We had the exact same thing. And Peter and we know each other from Ghent University. We were actually together at Ghent. We are the exact same age. We went separate ways. I went to the US, joining Fortify. He went to Australia for BEA systems, if I'm not mistaken, or UI even before that. And you kind of lost track of each other. He started his company, I started my company, and we actually re-met at RSA. And he was building a training solution, Secure Code Warrior, gamified training solution, where I was building, and that's why I know this information about static analysis and IDEs. We were building guidance in the IDE for developers. So we were really, hey, how can we guide developers in real time?
So and recommendations that are like pretty specific then?
Yeah, and we tried a lot of different models because my history with Fortify was this endless cycle of you find a bug and you give it to a developer. Oh my God, another bug, and you give it to a developer. So there's an endless cycle. And my idea was like, hey, how can we break that cycle? How can we stop that cycle and tell the developer how to develop secure code from the start? And the way I approached that was, you know what, you really have to be very, very close to the developer. You have to be there when he is coding, and you have to give him feedback when he is coding. And not telling the wrong thing, not telling, you know, you're doing it wrong and this is not good and you have a mistake and I will not tell you how to fix it. No, really be there and say, this is your problem. This is a known problem. This is how it works and this is how you fix it. So really the positive angle. So both our companies, both our vision was actually very, very aligned, and we were very complementary in what we were doing, also in skill set and market. It was actually a natural fit to join forces and say, hey, you know what? Let's go onto this market with a training solution that scales very well, that we go to huge organizations and say, hey, you know what? Do you want to tackle this problem the right way en masse? Then this is our solution. This is our training solution. And then the next step is more around tooling and being closer to the developer. So the way Peter took that approach is really he was working very close with the financial institutions in Sydney. The idea was there to go enterprise from the start. It was not selling to 3, 4, 5 developers. That was not the initial goal. The initial goal was really, hey, how can we sell to 10,000 people? How can we train people, 10,000 people at once? Because Peter, he did SANS before where you train 20 people at a time. But if you have 10,000 people in an organization and you do them at 20 people in a week, well, you know, that's not going to make it.
It's not going to scale.
No, that's not going to scale. So he was thinking like, hey, how can I do this in an interesting way, in a really interesting way, not boring videos, but in an interesting way. So the first thing that you need to tackle is it has to be interesting for a developer. And you would say, well, of course, you know, that's easy, make it interesting. But what interesting really means is you have to have it in the language and the framework of that developer. It does not make sense to give a developer Java code if he's writing .NET code on a day-to-day basis, or more extreme, you know, he's working on COBOL and you give him a Java course.
I think he cut out a little bit.
Yep. He's frozen. So.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll unfreeze soon.
Yeah.
I think we found the same thing with our training, that you have to make it interesting. We also have developers in it.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe we're getting him back.
Yeah, I think I didn't pay my internet bill.
I've had that issue before too.
You have to put in another quarter? Is that, you know?
Yeah, that's what I've just done. So in the meantime, I just put in or my kids are playing Fortnite and it's eating up all the bandwidth. I don't know.
Gosh, don't even get me started on Fortnite. And that has been the bane of my existence this actual weekend. I have a 7-year-old. I should have not let him play Fortnite. It's become a thing. It's an obsessive, addictive thing. Do not let your kids play Fortnite if they're too young. Like take it from me.
I so disagree. I play Fortnite too because it's actually a really good way if I'm traveling to connect with my kids and have a good chat.
If it's healthy, if they can maintain a healthy relationship.
With
But my son's not having. Anyways, I don't know how we're getting off on that.
Yeah.
That subject, but just be warned that it can be dangerous, people.
Yeah.
On the training solution, Peter really thought about, hey, how can we do this enterprise-wide? We have to have features like SSO from the start, because we have to make sure that this scale. So you have to have meat. You have to have the training modules in the language and the framework of the developer. Target was financial market. So let's start with Java and .NET. And if that works, let's make some more languages and frameworks. And right now we're up to 29. So all the way from very old stuff like COBOL to newer stuff like Kotlin. We also have C and C++ because now we can address another market. More telcos, for example, or embedded systems that are using more of the C and C++. But that grew. You cannot do that from the start. So from the start, you really have to focus on one thing, which was make something that is useful for the financial institution that works for 10,000 developers at once. And then the gamification is an overlay to your solution. If you start with, hey, I want to make a gamified platform, yeah, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. If you don't have the meat, you can do whatever with gamification. It's not going to work. So start with having some meat, something that works, something that is relevant. But I surely agree with if you overlay that with some gamification aspects, with some fun aspects, for sure you can get some traction with your developers, and they hopefully like it, and it's more engaging for them. So have some meat and then overlay it with
when you say meat, do you mean that the challenges that are relevant? Like, do you mean like the breadth of the challenges, or the challenges being just like relevant to the developers?
Yeah, so it has to be relevant for the developers. There has to be something in there, and it has to be substantial. The last number that I've heard is that we have like 4,000 training modules today. So
I believe it.
That is substantial, and still, it's still hard for us to keep up and keep that pace and make it, even for us, make it in a scalable way. We want, have as many developers as possible on our platform and train them all at once, so in a scalable way. But also for us, we cannot write challenge per challenge. We also have to figure out, like, hey, what can we do to transform code and make challenges automatically? So we cracked a really good nut end of last year, where we made some engine to make challenges, and it's really nifty. It's really interesting. So even for us, we want to scale into the market, but also we want to scale ourselves to have that capability to serve as many people as possible.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because, like I said, some of those have like Node, I think, had something like 600 and something challenges, and I know the Ruby on Rails one had probably that same amount, and there's a ton of challenges. And I was thinking, like, man, it has to take a lot of time because it's not just the challenge, it's also the solution. It's right, the different solutions that are like mostly incorrect, and there's one that is correct, so there there's a lot of content to sort of build. So I was trying to think of like how much hours goes into that.
I can give you an idea. So what we do is, initially it takes us 2 days to write a challenge from start to finish, with descriptions, with code review, with security review, and it actually goes through a translation company too. So it takes 2 full days, 16 hours to make one particular training module. And as you rightfully say, we're serving a difficult market, because a developer, let's be honest, if you ask a developer, is this a great thing? The best you can either get a no, or you can get a meh, So if you reach
a very fickle market, I know that. I know that from firsthand. It's very difficult.
So if you reach the meh zone, you're like, wow, okay, good, they like it. So we're actually lucky. We're lucky that our developers like it. But one thing which is which was really well engineered, I think, is the fact that they can give instant feedback, and we have a team in the back that actually takes that feedback and updates our challenges. So even if the developer says no, this is crap, this is not good, you need to fix that, we have a team in the back that says, okay, let's look into that, and we either give a response why we think we are right, or we actually update our challenge. And that's the only way it's going to work. It's somewhat a community effort too, you know?
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, most of the feedback that we have had on the platform was positive. So it wasn't even meh. It was like mostly positive. So we were really happy with it.
Yeah.
You are always going to have like one or two people that are like, oh, there's probably a better way to solve that, or whatever. But like, if you're getting the majority of people giving good feedback, that's a really hard thing to obtain in any platform that you put out there. So kudos to you. I mean, on that note, like, is there like like sort of an evolution coming along with training, or is there something more that you think is going to happen in the next couple of years? Is it just more of sort of, and I know I'm not just talking about Secure Code Warrior. I just mean how training occurs, in general, like without giving away too much, like proprietary, whatever plans you might have.
No, so I'm happy to talk about that. So what I think, is training right now, as it stands, it has to be more embedded into our day-to-day work. What we're doing today with Secure Code Warrior is, I think, a really good first step. I think personally, but I think we need to do better. I think we need to do better in the next couple of years to be even closer to the developer, be part of what he's doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's really important. I think we are fortunate that we have this large database of code challenges and training modules. I think now we need to think about, hey, how can we bring that in a very interesting way close to the developer? If he's working on a SQL injection, that's when we need to be there and say, hey, you know what? Here's a SQL injection training module. And we have a lot of I think, pretty good ideas that we're executing on right now, where we work on ways on making ourselves part of that particular ecosystem, that whole DevOps movement. We're no longer, doing the whole waterfall thingy. What we build today is going to ship tomorrow. So we need to make sure that we're there fast. We cannot wait and say, well, today is going to be training day, and then we do 5 days of development and then another training day. No, we need to be more agile in our way of providing training to developers too, and train them at the right time, the right moment when he's working on. If he's writing a query against the database and you figure out that he has never taken a SQL injection training, that's when we need to say, hey, by the way, here's a SQL injection training.
So almost a just in time training, right? Absolutely. For lack of a better term, or
absolutely.
So I mean, is that part of what you've been using, like your IDE integrations? Like you're looking into how do we actually pull that into that activity rather than, I mean, I know the gamification and like the platform itself now is embedded in the browser and all of that, but are you trying to pull that way with an IDE?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking at a lot of different options. Bug tracking systems, IDEs, Slack, for example. So how can we make sure that where the developer is in his day-to-day environment, that's where we need to be. So everything that you can think of, tools that a developer is touching on a day-to-day basis, that's where we want to be. It's not going to happen overnight, and there's a lot of bad ideas too, but we need to make sure, we need to filter the good ideas and figure out, how can we bring our training solution closer to the developer?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting take on training in general. Because we've seen the static analysis tools kind of go through that same iteration, right? As initially like, oh, we're just going to plug into the build pipeline and we'll create the results there. And then the developers never see those results, or they never see those findings, and it never gets fixed. And so it just becomes noise around the build, right? And so they've pushed. I mean, you worked on that at Fortify, then the integration with IDEs and pushing more into developers' daily workspace, correct?
Yes, but I think there's a substantial difference here, and I think the difference is where the static analysis solutions, the penetration testing solutions, they all give you bad news. They actually all give you bad. They don't want to help you. They do not want to help. Yeah. They just want to smack you and say no. Wrong, and they want to smack you fast. That's essentially what they do. They no longer wait until everything is built and they're going to do it at the end of the month. No, they want to do it in real time. What we're doing, we really want to bring positive out, and we really want to help the developer. The entire focus of Secure Code Warrior is doing something positive, help the developer. We should be the friend of the developer, not really of the AppSec dude. Of course, it's going to make the AppSec dude happy, but we want to help the developer. We are there to help him and make sure it flies through that code review. It flies through that static analysis solution. So our entire branding is around positiveness, around making this thing work, and rally the entire organization behind something which ultimately the company benefits of.
Mm-hmm. So what has been kind of the biggest challenge of like that change in mentality, right? From hey, it's a security tool to hey, this is actually a development training as opposed to a security training.
I think the biggest change is when we come into organizations, we really want. So also when we initially started, Peter was sitting down with developers and asked them, is this relevant to you or is it not relevant to you? And how do we need to present this code and how should it work? And actually, today we're still doing the same thing. Yes, we come in through AppSec or security, but our proof of concept is really with the developers, and we're asking, hey, do you see value? Is this something that will work in your organization? Can you rally around a theme like Star Wars and do a tournament Star Wars wise and give out prizes? Is that something that will fly in your organization? And from my old days, I cannot see that same thing when we sold the static analysis solution. We were there with AppSec. Did it help AppSec? Yes. Well, then we're gonna write a check. Whatever the developer thinks is, they didn't really ask. And now you bring it closer to the developer, and some, don't get me wrong, we're not gonna, you still need that particular thing. You still need static analysis. You still need penetration testing. Of course, you need that. But everything has its place in the SDLC, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you need, speaking as somebody who's on the internal AppSec team, you do need your developers to basically propagate your knowledge base, right? And be I mean, there's no way I feel like we have a pretty large AppSec team at GitHub. We've got easily 8 or 9 people, and that's still not nearly enough for all the developers that we have. So we do rely pretty heavily on, developers both raising issues when they see them, but also, obviously being able to detect them and engaging us when, I'm going to make a new feature, I'm going to make a new app, and I know I need to reach out and engage for architecture and just, architecture and design discussions. So just even having visibility in front of the developers to know that we exist, and because we've got, for us, and I don't know how this is for other organizations, but when you're onboarding sometimes waves of developers, like we've definitely had, they may not even know you exist. So having something that gets you in front of them and makes you visible for what it's worth, I think that's incredibly important.
And in that particular scenario, if you have waves of developers, it may be a good idea to weave some training into the onboarding, where if I don't know what the biggest problem is that's in your organization, but if it's SQL injection, well, weave some SQL injection training in there, or some belting system where you say, well, go through the OWASP top 10 in a relevant language that you're using on a day-to-day basis, and oh, by the way, here are the AppSec people that can help you out in if you have any questions. Well, it may be a really good idea to train your developers early on and make sure that you are known in the organization.
We've had some people sort of point to the fact they don't really think that the OWASP top 10 is necessarily like the most relevant thing when it comes to training. I think there's still plenty on there, especially with like, I think there's plenty on there when it comes to like authorization and access control and, things like cross-site request forgery and stuff. It's still completely applicable, but I'm curious about your thoughts on like sort of the, where the OWASP top 10 is now. Are you seeing specifically, I guess where I want to get to with this is like, are there vulnerabilities that your customers are more now interested in that maybe are outside of the OWASP top 10 that are becoming more of a trend that you are hearing about or seeing?
So I agree. Like if you say, hey, about categories of problems, it doesn't scale across languages. To give you one simple example, COBOL, where is the OWASP top 10 for COBOL? Of course, that does not exist, and we have to have a top 10. So what we've done in our organization is then we've done our own research and we try to work with the industry and say, hey, you're a COBOL developer, what do you see? Hey, you're a COBOL developer, what do you see? And we've built a top 10 in there. So I think OWASP top 10 has its place. It is relevant for certain languages, and we provide that in these languages. For other languages, of course, if it's not web, it's not web, and we have to come up with our own solution. Same is true for C and C++. So we try to map, and we go into the industry. We take some questionnaires, and we figure out what people are really using and seeing. And that's what we're building on top of. OWASP, it has its place. It's definitely useful, but not, for what it is built for, essentially. It is useful for what it is built for. It would be nice if we can collect even more statistics and have our own data and tell you or tell the world what we see is relevant. We're not quite there yet, but of course, that's an interesting idea to figure out from our own customers what do they see and what's very relevant. But we have to start somewhere. If nobody knows about security, nobody's going to spot security issues, and it's impossible to collect data. So let's take it step by step and see where this lead us to.
Yeah, I always find that problem interesting. That hey, we train people on something like SQL injection, right? And of course, after we train them, we see more instances of SQL injection because they know what to look for, right? Absolutely. And so it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy that, hey, you know what? SSRF is going to be the next big thing. We train on everybody on what SSRF is, and all of a sudden the bug bounty guys find it. You know what I mean? It's just like the whole industry has a tendency to do that over and over and over with every single bug that's out there. And so
every time James Kettle releases a blog post,
yes,
our bug bounty program gets inundated with like copy pasta. Like, here's from James Kettle's blog post, this thing that's going to be the thing that I need to focus.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and actually one that we thought about too, where we say sometimes it's counterintuitive, but sometimes you need to train people on stuff that they have not that they are not aware of. So if you know that they've taken SQL injection training and cross-site scripting training, well, train them on something else, because of course they're going to see more of SQL injection and cross-site scripting. It sounds counterintuitive, but you're exactly right.
Yeah. Well, and that, I always wonder, like, so you combined your, like, the training that you're giving with like the analytics behind the scenes of, all right, we train people on SQL injection and cross-site scripting. Hey, for the next 2 months or 6 months, we saw like a marked increase in the number of those findings in our code, and then it starts to tail off, right? That is probably that's the outcome that you desire as an application security person, even though to management it looks like, oh my gosh, right? We just got way worse, rather than no, we got really a lot better at identifying those issues, right? Are you seeing those sorts of trends?
So what we normally start with is we ask the customer, like, what is your biggest problem? And to be honest, our best sales are to people that have a static analysis solution, that are doing penetration testing. It's not to the companies that have never been through these pains before. So the first thing that we do ask is, what do you really see? What is really a problem within your organization? Is it SQL injection, for example? And if it is, then we actually work with them, and we write out a program where we're going to train the developers on SQL injection. And yes, they actually fix. So if you look at the trend, then by the static analysis solution, it goes down. But at the same time, they do find more manual problems, of course, because then they say, oh my God, there's this thing here too, and it's not pointed out by the static analysis solution, but we found it. So the way we approach it, because metrics is very hard, in application security, is really
they are.
Let's not break open that can of worms, but we ask the customer, like, what do you want to get out of the program? Is it general awareness, or do you have a problem in your static analysis solution that is going all red with SQL injection? Well, let's focus on that. It's going to go down in that static analysis solution. Yes, there's going to be more manual findings, but that's good. That's good. That means people get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I always wonder, like, what the management response to that is. Obviously, if they're paying for training, they've got some understanding, and the AppSec guys and even the developers should understand.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. But they should understand that whole kind of process that's in there. But as an industry, I don't think we're very well attuned to that, right? Because it always is just like the raw count, right? We're always talking about, for the OWASP top 10, we're just going to go look at the number of findings that people have. And I mean, we saw all the problems with 2017 and the tools that we're spitting out, cross-site scripting and everything else, that was like, that they skewed the results, right?
Yeah. And also, like you were saying earlier, language and framework plays a huge part in it too, in what you'll see.
So maybe one thing that I would like to add to that is we actually like to work with companies that get it. And what I mean by that is actually with companies that have a static analysis solution, penetration testing solution, they already get it. But on top of that, they are not doing this thing for compliance. They look through compliance and they say, we understand the problem. We want to fix it. We understand that this and that is going to happen, but we want to do the right thing. And these are ideal customers. They get it from top to bottom. If they only do it for compliance, we rather not work with that organization. It's we rather make a substantial difference within an organization where everybody rallies around it and says, you know what, we want to do the good thing. We want to make our code more secure, and it's not just the rubber stamp on our code.
Yeah, I mean that's a good situation to be in. I mean, as a consultant, like coming from the consulting side, I'm with you on that. And then there are still times that I end up taking stuff that's, hey, I've got a couple weeks that I need to fill, and I realize it's just a compliance check, but right.
I know, but so don't get me wrong. Like it may not be a bad idea to come in through compliance. If you need to do compliance, you need to do compliance. But there are companies that just say, you know what, it's only for that. I don't care about security. We only want the rubber stamp. And that's that's not a company that we want to engage with. They want to make a substantial difference.
Yeah. Which makes sense, right? Like I always feel like compliance is kind of the sneaky way to get in, right? Yeah. But if you can engage with the right people after compliance has brought you in, it can be successful, right? It can work out, but it's harder there than it is if a developer or an application security person actually brings you in.
Absolutely.
Right? Just because they understand the situation.
And even better if developers bring us in.
Yeah. Yep. So, like in those organizations, when you have developers that bring you in, like how long does it usually take to bring the platform up to speed? Right? Is it overnight, or is it a couple weeks? What's the typical kind of play there?
So no, it's not overnight, and there are good reasons for it. So when we engage with an organization, we first really want to know what they want to achieve. Just having people on the platform is not what they want to achieve. They always have some goal in mind. So we have a customer success team that really helps with companies making them successful with our solution. So when we sell, they go in and they really try to understand, what do you want to achieve, and do we all have the right people on board to achieve that thing? Because it's one thing to set a goal, but if nobody rallies around it, and if you do not know who you need to talk to, then it's not going to happen either. So that's the first thing that needs to happen. Normally, the second thing that happens, of course, based on the plan, is you start with a tournament. You start with a tournament to engage people, to make sure that there's a positive vibe around Secure Code Warrior. Sometimes they make a team, like a Star Wars team, with some prizes, and you really want to set the thing up right from the start. You want to make sure that it is set up right, that people are engaged, they are having fun. It's something that they want to do and not something that they are forced to do. And quite often happens is afterwards, people tell people about this thing, and you can win some prizes, and it goes through the organization. And then, of course, it depends on your goal and your strategy on how to roll it out. And it is a little bit steered about our customer success people. They have a plan in place, say, do this, do that. This is in other organizations with this particular or a similar culture. This is what works for them and what's not working for them. So a rollout is purely based on what you really want to achieve at what speed and in what time frame. Sometimes there's, don't get me wrong, we do sell to people that want to have compliance, and the budget is coming out of compliance, and then there's a deadline where you need to show that people are trained. So some people work towards that particular date and roll it out towards that particular date. Other organizations, roll it out by office. There's a plenty of different strategies on how to roll out the training program, all depending on company and culture.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of the tournament up front, right? Like, again, the gamification of like actual training or of actual, secure coding. Ken and I, at one point had built a small platform, not to the level that Secure Code Warrior is, but a training platform as well. And it's, I don't know, I keep going back to the point that it's like the amount of work that goes into what you're doing behind the scenes is often glossed over, right? Like you're saying 16 hours to build one of those modules. And and that's end to end. And that's actually very impressive.
That's quick.
It's really quick. Like some of the stuff that we were doing, and we only ended up dealing, I think, with like 4 or 5 different languages and frameworks, and the hurdles that you have to jump through, and the technical advancement that you have to make. I mean, obviously having a team helps, right? I just don't want to discount the amount of effort that goes into that. Having that behind the scenes, behind that gamification is what's impressive. And that's the tech. I mean, obviously that's what makes Secure Code Warrior. That layer on front is helpful to actually get it picked up. And, I think there's a lot of organizations that attempt to do some sort of gamification around security in general, right? Whether that's training, whether that's identifying incidents, identifying like phishing emails, right? Like there's quite a few different platforms that do that, but the technology behind it is what really makes it work. And I think that's the point that you were making earlier, right?
Yeah, and it's so, and I absolutely follow your point, because if you try something out, then my assumption is you've built that, you've put a lot of hours in there, and you give it to a developer, and sometimes in no time they go through it and they're like, yeah, done, what's next? And then you're like, oh my God, I spent 2 weeks building something and it took them 10 minutes to do this, and now I have to build another 2 weeks stuff, and they go through it in 10 minutes. So there's a huge imbalance, and that's something that that we definitely struggle with initially. If you have 100 challenges, well, that's nothing. If 100 challenges, over 2 or 3 languages, that's literally nothing. People play 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes at most a challenge, and they go through it. So you need to have a substantial set of challenges. Making a proof of concept is very, very trivial, but making this library of things that are good, that are vetted, that people can relate to is definitely a challenge.
Well, and it's not only that, but it's also each of those different languages and frameworks is constantly evolving. So you spent 2 weeks, and then Rails comes out with a new version, and you got to spend another 2 weeks on each of those, or at least like a portion of time to keep it up to date, right? It's a constantly evolving issue.
It's something that a lot of people struggle with. I remember in the Fortify days, we definitely struggled with that too. What do you do with static analysis if you go through versions and you make this problem super, super complex? You make it super, super complex. So luckily, I was able to learn a little bit from that experience and take that with me into Secure Code Warrior. But it's not a solved thing. It is not a solved thing. It is a hugely complex problem. Like, what do you support and what do you not support? And with 29 languages and frameworks, if we would do versioning, that would make it insanely complex. And that's why this like automation and scalability thing that we're working on is really helping us out.
To be fair, I mean, you can get the gist as a developer, like especially if you're, because I think if you're a developer who works on, let's say, Java Spring, like you've been through all the various iterations, you've been there. It's not like you just decided one day, I'm going to do Java Spring, coming from, I don't know, Django or whatever other. Yeah, it's not like you've been with that platform for a while, is I guess my point. So you can get the gist of the challenge from that, I feel like.
Yeah, it's still a complex problem. Because we need to support people that are still writing COBOL, COBOL code. So like we don't even have to talk about versioning. That just gives you the magnitude of the problem. If we still need to support COBOL, so people on Angular 1, they're still there. They're still there.
Oh yeah.
With versions of very early Java, very early .NET, why do they not move? Well, it's impossible for them to move. They just have that one person still maintaining the code. He needs to understand the code. So, it's a big challenge and one that we like, of course. The more challenges, the better. If you crack the nut on it, it makes it better.
So there is one thing I wanted to get to before we ended the show. I was not able to actually, as I mentioned, I'd watched the AppSec Weekly podcast with you, but I had not had the opportunity to watch your talk, which sounded super interesting, about how to spend $3.6 million on one coding mistake. That title, I didn't get it. I'm going to post a link to it. I didn't get a chance to watch it, but that title stuck out.
It's talkbait, right?
What's that?
It's talkbait or clickbait? No, just kidding. Yeah.
It looks super interesting. I was hoping maybe we could get like this sort of Cliff Note version from you, because it sounded really, really cool.
It's interesting that you bring it up. So this talk is a couple years old, and I actually, over Christmas and New Year, I'm thinking about the new talk, and I actually want to take that one back, because people say, you know what, this one is outdated. You talk about how software is built really in a waterfall methodology, and it doesn't make sense these days, and I actually agree with that. So the idea for the talk was, hey, you know what, I read an article and says, I think Verizon said the average breach cost you 3.6 million. So I thought, well, what can you do with 3.6 million in software security? You can actually wait until that one thing happens and spend the 3.6 million, or you can try and take, for example, half of that money and spend it on application security. So what do you do then? Do you throw a lot of money on pen testers? Do you throw a lot of money on static analysis, or on training, or a little bit here, or a little bit there?
Bet it all on Seth. Sorry.
So the idea was really, or do you listen to Gartner? So where do you spend the money? And I went through an exercise, how you can potentially spend money on particular activities in the SDLC, and how you can optimize your budget. What I think what was really interesting for me is I've done some analysis of an organization where I was. Before Secure Code Warrior, I did a brief period of consulting. And I was sitting there, and I knew the numbers, what they were spending. And the calculation that I made was every developer that worked for a day was introducing $50 in application security cost. Because every day, like on the time spent, they were, I think it was $50, around $47. I should look up the number. It's a couple of years old, but what I figured out is they introduce at this particular rate bugs, and this is what they pay for their static analysis solution and their pen testing. So the idea was, well, you have a couple options. You can fire all your developers, then no bugs are introduced anymore, or you can actually try to optimize your budget for application security and see how you can reduce that number. Because every day that a developer writes code, he actually introduces bugs, and he introduces $50 of future cost in your organization. So I would like to redo that particular exercise. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that, because these days it's no longer relevant. What I was working with, I think, is no longer relevant in that DevOps cycle, fast shipping. It's more about confidence. So I need to get my head around, like, hey, what is relevant these days? What does development really look like these days? and how should we optimize our budget these days for the new world in which we write software.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, right? You're absolutely right. The whole like, hey, you're going to spend any organization over a long enough time period is going to spend that money, whether it's after the fact when a breach happens and they're doing incident response, or prior to that when they're actually trying to build code. I don't think, waterfall versus the agile, the DevOps methodology, like I always run it as a consultant. I always run into, hey, there's the whole concept of tech debt, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like you've put a number on that, like application security tech debt. But if you could figure out how to actually apply that, it would probably still be pretty relevant, because the developers are constantly churning out code. And if anything, they're not given as much time on a 2-week or 4-week cycle in the waterfall methodology to actually build things out. It's, hey, I have to build this and ship it out now. And if there's a problem with it, I add it to the backlog.
Yep.
And it's actually documented that there's an issue, that I know there's a problem with authorization or with how I'm handling SQL, whatever, right? And but that associated cost and that associated tech debt is still there, right?
Sure. So what the way I see it is yes, but it's coming. There's this faster feedback loop where you find a problem and you get it into your backlog, and maybe the next sprint you already tackle it. So there's this faster feedback loop where in the old days you just were working on code, and at the end you brought in a pen tester that worked on it for 2 weeks and gave you a report, and then for the next 6 months you didn't do anything at all. So it was more in a staged process where once the pen test comes in, you take these issues back to the developers, you block out a week and you work on these issues. So I think the feedback loop and the cycle is faster. So I need to figure out, how you can measure that better. So I think, yes, components are still relevant. We still work with pen testers and all of that. But the speed at which issues are coming back and can potentially be fixed is different.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be interesting. Definitely, you should redo that. In all of your spare time, right?
I think it's not just speed that factors in too. The new thing that has occurred beyond developers being significantly, I feel like anyways, significantly more aware of things like breaches and security incidents, is these bug bounty programs have introduced an entirely different dynamic, which changes not only your costs for what's paid out, but internally, your CERT team looking into it, your developer teams responding, your product managers spending their time prioritizing. There's all these different costs, and outside of bug bounty programs, you had mentioned integrating with Secure Code Warrior like Jira and whatnot, and just the tracking mechanisms and the tooling and just the you're right that the processes themselves, they've all impacted and changed cost specifically. And yeah, so anyways, I don't know where I was going with that, but I agree. I think things have changed, and there's a few different factors that play into it, just beyond continuous development to continuous integration.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, yeah.
I'll read
enough rambling from me.
No, it's definitely an interesting problem, right? And I don't know, you talk about wanting to deal with organizations that aren't just compliance driven, and I think that feeds into it, right? If they're willing to take some of that future cost and spread it over the next couple of years, it's a lot easier to deal with that organization because they understand the issues that go into security, as opposed to no, it's just because the government told us that we had to do this, so we're going to do it, right?
Oh, I hate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? So, you can use, you had mentioned this too earlier, Seth, you had kind of pointed to this. You can use compliance as a driver. You both did. You can use compliance as a driver, but also make whatever you're doing to meet compliance be useful. You can do that, but you're right. There are people who don't care. They just want to I got to put this little X in that box and move on, So yeah, people play a part.
Well, and Yeah, I mean, speaking to that specifically, like I know, Fortify was probably a big player. Well, they were a big player when PCI took off, right? You talk about one way that compliance actually grew the industry. PCI was a huge driver for static analysis, dynamic analysis, consulting, like penetration testing, because all these organizations had to take security seriously in order to accept credit cards, right? To get paid.
Yeah. And
so like there were organizations that's all they did. They're like, okay, what's the bare minimum that I have to do to get through PCI? And we saw, there's still those organizations that are out there, as opposed to the ones that are like, all right, we know we have to do this for PCI or whatever other, banking regulation. Why don't we do it well? So that it's a feature rather than a cost when it comes down to it. So.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, PCI could have been a good driver for them, but I think in general the AppSec market is I think Fortify is still doing well. Just a growing market, and everybody's doing well in the AppSec market. It's just a market that is so booming and so growing that I think everybody is doing well in this particular market.
Yeah. I mean, there's multiple different drivers. I mean, that was one of the kind of the first regulations that came about that specifically addressed, like the OWASP Top 10, and actually mentioned static analysis, right? When they're like, hey, you have to do some sort of static analysis or dynamic testing in order to accept credit cards. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting where you think that is proactive, but at the same time, no, that's not really proactive. That's very reactive, what you're doing at that point in time. And I think 90% of that market, of the AppSec market, is playing in that reactive space where we try to do the more proactive way and the proactive approach of trying to make a change in that market.
Yeah. Well, we've been going for an hour, but I feel like you're pushing the right direction, right? Like, after Ken and I had that experience with it, with building training and like giving in-person training, actual scalability, we're excited to see, products like Secure Code Warrior that are pushing that envelope, right?
Yeah, I know Seth and I know how difficult it is. It really is, and like how and it's hard to build something that, like, that's the thing. Seth and I really do understand like how hard it is to build one of these things that like addresses all these needs. And that's why I chose the platform, is because when I reviewed it, I was like, this is what I was trying to basically. This is what we were trying to basically get to,
Mm-hmm. One thing,
being able to do that many challenges is not so easy.
One thing I would like to add is we're really looking for people that want to help build our platform out. So with the injection that we received, we really want to, we want to figure out like who to work with and who can actually build this platform to a top-notch platform with everything that we wish we could do to help a developer in real time. So building out these challenges, it would be fantastic if people say, well, you know what, I really want to make a difference. I really want to. It's an interesting opportunity too. If we have 100,000 people on our platform, so with writing a challenge, you can make an impact to and potentially 100,000 people. And we're 5 years old. We are just starting. So I really, really hope that we can find some talented people that can help us out and crack a couple of these nuts along the way, a couple of these challenges, and help us build that platform.
Cool. On that note, one question that we always ask at the end of the show, that's where we're at. So anything it sounds like you're mentioning, kind of the hiring aspect. One thing is there anywhere you're going to be like soon that people can, this year conference wise or event wise, that people can like meet you in person? And then the second part is there anything else you want to leave, parting thoughts with this?
Where can people meet me? So I unfortunately will not be at the OWASP California thing later this week, but I will be at RSA. And the things around RSA, I'm actually staying a little bit longer in the Bay Area. So if people want to meet me at RSA or around RSA, happy to do so. I'm actually quite often pretty much everywhere. So with our headquarters being in Sydney, I'm quite often in Sydney. With an office in Boston, I'm quite often in Boston. with my history of Fortify and a lot of friends in the Bay Area. I'm quite often in the Bay Area. And I'm based in Bruges, Belgium, with an office in London, which is just an hour and a half train ride. So if people want to meet me, send me a message, and I'm pretty confident there's a time where we can meet up in person.
Awesome. And I actually need to put your Twitter handle out there to everyone, which I'll do here in a moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then, anything else you want to leave people with before we hop off the podcast?
I think I want to reiterate that we're looking for like enthusiastic people across the globe, wherever you are. We're no longer bound to a place these days. Remote working is a thing. It is challenging. Don't get me wrong. I've done it for 4 or 5 years for Fortify, because in the middle of my journey I moved back to Belgium, so I know how challenging it is. But we're just looking for talented people in pretty much every department that want to make a difference in this world, and do the proactive way and not the reactive way.
By the way, I was out in Bruges in, I think, what was it, October, Seth? Early October. I think it's early October. That was a beautiful place. That was one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And this is totally unrelated to the podcast. I just wanted to mention that was seriously, it was gorgeous. It was an amazing place.
That was not a business trip.
No. Well, we did OWASP Amsterdam, and then I took my family on a couple different day trips. That was one of them. And we realized we needed more than a day there, because it was the beer was amazing, the food was amazing, the people were amazing, the city was beautiful. It was like fantastic. So
next time around, you have to let me know. We'll go.
Yeah, for sure.
Some good everything.
Yeah, for sure. It was. Yeah, it was. Well, and I won't go into. There were cool things. There was like a museum there that we had just like, they had an Egyptian. What I'm trying to say, they had an Egyptian portion added onto it that was temporary, and that was really cool to see. And it was just like, we were very lucky because we didn't plan it that way; it just happened to be there, so it's really cool.
Okay.
Anyways,
well,
thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's been it's been great to catch up and to actually meet you semi face to face. I will be down at RSA, so let's make sure we talk. I'll bring a T-shirt and everything that for you down there. So
I'll bring one for you.
Awesome. That'll be awesome.
Trading.
Cool. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's everything for today. Ken, unless you've got anything else, we'll go ahead and call.
Nope. Just thank you for your time, and thank you to the viewers for watching and tuning in.
Thank you very much for the invite, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Matias. See you next week.